There's been mixed reaction to government's decision to close public schools. Teacher union SADTU says that the closure of public schools highlights the wide gap that exists between the rich and the poor. In his address to the nation last night, President Cyril Ramaphosa announced a 4-week closure of all public schools from Monday until the 24th of August. Grade 12 pupils and teachers, however, will get a 1-week break, while grade 7 learners will have a 2-week break and return to school on the 10th of August. Ramaphosa did not mention what would happen to private schools in the country. The union says it's concerned that inequalities in education continue, but the Independent Schools Association of Southern Africa has sought to explain why its schools have not been closed. Meanwhile, the Human Rights Commission says government's decision to close all public schools is regrettable and unjustifiable. DA interim leader John Steenhuisen says that his party will be heading to court to challenge government's decision to close schools. Steenhuisen says that the decision will perpetuate inequality and goes against scientific advice. All right, well, for more reaction on government's decision to close public schools, we're now joined by Equal Education General Secretary Noncedo Madubedube. Thank you so very much for joining us again on SA Today. We do appreciate your time.
Thank you very much for having us. It's indeed difficult times in the education sector.
What is your initial reaction, of course, to the President's statement last night regarding that closure of schools from the 27th of July to the 24th of August? You've said on social media that there's a cautious support, but then I hear now you're saying that it is an unfortunate situation. Where exactly does equal education really stand on the issue?
Yeah, so I was saying that there are difficult times inside the sector because the decisions that we need to be supporting or making and informing from a school community level are quite complex. Equal Education initially had talked to the Department of Education representing learners across 5 provinces. And we had said to the department it's important that whatever decisions they make, they consider the voices of school communities first. And that we are aware that there's a risk-adjusted strategy that had been put on the table by the Department of Basic Education for provinces to administer. And this would mean that at different times, different schools, based on where they were geographically and what the community transmission rate looked like, would open and close. And we had said that cautiously during this period, you have to consider the experience of teachers, learners, school members, but prioritize ensuring that the social needs of learners, the reasons that they want to be at school, aren't just for what happens inside the classroom, but that's a big part of it. But think about the access to food, think about the access to mediation support, the blended learning approach via TV and radio. Our learners and our members have said is insufficient to have them carry through curricula for the year. And the types of psychosocial needs and anxieties that are sort of on the rise as a result of COVID. All of these things are considerations in thinking about whether schools should, in inverted commas, remain closed or open.
Yeah. I'm now remembering our last conversation, Noncedo. You'd mentioned the fact that there is quite a problem with this issue of a uniform approach. And I guess that's, from what I'm hearing you saying now, that's again the issue where it seems as though it's been applied yet again. There's this uniform approach. Do you feel that the government has the capacity to really take each case from, case to case in terms of being able to assess, each school, each province? Do they have the capacity in actual fact to be able to do that? Is it not, I suppose, easier for the government to kind of go, well, this is the plan for all schools and this is what the decision is? I mean, how do you see government really doing this? If you're saying that there's a problem with a uniform approach, how should the government really be approaching this situation regarding schools?
Yeah. So there's 2 things there. The first is that the Department of Basic Education absolutely has the infrastructure to be able to roll out things that are suited to school communities. Looking at what governments can do from national into province, into circuit level, and then supporting the school community in its immediate environment. That's absolutely plausible. And this is what the risk-adjusted strategy was trying to do. Now, the Department of Basic Education, I mean, it's good for people to talk to public in ways that are firm and build confidence, but they can't spin the story. What we understand has happened with the Department of Basic Education is that political pressure coming from teachers as a result of the experience, which is justified inside schools, and the feedback that gotten from the cabinet and NCC around the poor delivery of the non-negotiables that would be captured inside the standard operating procedures from government had it been met. The reasons teachers are frustrated, anxious, nervous, is because the school environment isn't conducive for teaching and learning. And so learners are coming into an environment that's already highly sort of sensitive, tense, and not conducive for learning for them as well. And the things that they had touted as issues are around the provisions of water security, the provisions of adequate and dignified sanitation, an ability to be able to be inside a classroom that has less than 40 learners. Our rural province in particular have said their classes still have over 40 learners per classroom. And this is no surprise because ordinarily their classes would have at least over 76 learners per classroom. So the basic provisions they had put in place, they hadn't. Yeah. And what we're saying to the Department of Basic Education, don't squander the opportunity that you've given yourselves now through communities speaking for themselves during this period and applying immense political pressure around what is dignified and just in a work environment, in a school community environment. So we need all of these things in place in every single school, especially those that are in rural provinces. And the government must continue to then listen to communities. Now, I know that a lot of people, and I'm sure... Okay, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm going to change the topic slightly just because we're running out of time. I'd like to know, just because there is major reaction regarding the difference in approach towards private schools and public schools, the fact that private schools are now being exempt from this closure, and I really just want to get your reaction from Equal Education about this, especially because some people are saying that this sort of increases that inequality gap that you so often as Equal Education speak about. I'm sorry to kind of move to that topic, but I'd really like to get your reaction before I run out of time.
I absolutely understand the outrage by people. The truth of the matter is that regardless of whether the physical gates of private schools or independent schools are open or closed, those schools are still learning during this period. Schools that are in affluent communities and are independent are able to go online, virtual classrooms. They've got the kinds of support they need in order to run teaching and learning during this period. What we've welcomed from the Department of Basic Education is that they've said they're working on a multi-year recovery plan of the curricula, which means that, which is likely, and we're going to be watching this closely, that they've abandoned this finishing the academic year by hook or crook, because that was just not conducive. And definitely, everything that's happened in this period has exacerbated and perpetuated the inequalities inside our education system. So the communities out there that are arguing now that when government says we're closing schools for a period to ensure that things are in place, that should apply to all schools. I think that's just, but the reality of the matter is that whether those school gates are open or closed, learning is taking place in schools that have the resources to do so.
You know, so some parents and learners have, repeatedly said that they believe that, this year should, be written off, especially given the, I suppose, inconsistent messages that we're getting regarding schools. 1 minute they're closing, 1 minute they're reopening. As Equal Education, one of the major concerns, and you've raised it again today, that you've had about learners being left at home, is the fact that, there's a worry about the issue of food, access to food, from the food schemes, as well as just the general safety of learners who would then be, sitting at home, whom parents would have to be at school and so forth. Is this still a major sort of worry for you, even though the president, I think, did touch on it very briefly in his address yesterday? Were you not convinced, given what the president said?
I mean, the victory around the school nutrition case for learners across the country and families is symbolically great. The concerns now is around implementation. So since last week Friday, the Departments of Basic Education have 10 days to report a plan publicly to us on how they plan to roll out this program. When we look on the backdrop of what the country is experiencing now, there is a massive humanitarian crisis around food security. As retrenchments happen, as we go into different levels of lockdown, we're going to see different sectors again closed down to some extent. So the ability for folks to have structural interventions around social relief and food in particular, history has taught us in the last 2-3 months that the Department of Social Development is inadequate in able to meet these things. The National Solidarity Fund hasn't been able to go as far as it needed to. Charity, civil society hasn't been able to structurally give relief to these communities. And the school nutrition program focuses on this issue for children in particular. It's a conditional grant. The money is sitting there, over 6.7 billion rand. The infrastructure exists. We need government to make sure that schools can be used as distribution sites in order to ensure that children are eating during this period. And this is something that we're calling for broadly, and we're going to put pressure on. And we're hoping that everyone out there that is close to a school, has a child, will help us monitor the implementation of this program.
All right, it's always informative talking to you. Thank you very much for giving us your input, that of Equal Education. Thank you, Noncedo Madubedube, General Secretary of Equal Education. Thanks for your time again.